The galaxy was old, older than most species could understand. Empires had risen and fallen across thousands of star systems. Wars had been fought over planets that no one remembered anymore. But through all of that chaos and change, one rule had remained the same for 3,000 years. Never disturb the human's thought. It was not a suggestion. It was not a guideline that could be bent when convenient. It was the single most important law in the entire galactic concord, written into the founding documents of every species that had ever joined the Great Alliance. Breaking this rule meant death. Not trial, not imprisonment, but immediate execution. Ambassador Vethral stood in the Great Council chamber, his green-scaled skin reflecting the soft light from the holographic displays around him. He was old by the standards of his people, the Karathi, and he had served the Concord for over 200 years. In all that time, he had never seen anyone question the rule about humans. Until now, Commander Zira of the Velith Republic stood before the council, her silver eyes burning with a fire that made the older representatives uncomfortable. She was young, barely 40 cycles old, and she had risen through the ranks of her people's military with a speed that worried many. She was brilliant, ambitious, and completely convinced that she was right about everything. "The quarantine is wrong," Zira said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "We have sealed an entire species inside their own solar system for 3,000 years. We have denied them contact with the rest of the galaxy. We have treated them like animals in a cage. And for what? For stories? For legends that no one can even verify anymore." Vethral sighed. He had heard these arguments before, though never spoken so boldly in the council chamber itself. "Commander Zira, the quarantine exists for good reasons. Reasons that have kept peace in the galaxy for millennia." "What reasons?" Zira demanded. "I have studied every record in the Concord archives. All I find are vague references to a war that happened thousands of years ago. A war that lasted only 17 days. How dangerous could a species be if they only fought for 17 days? The chamber fell silent. Vethral noticed that several of the older representatives had gone pale. They knew the answer to that question, even if they never spoke of it. "The length of the war is not the measure of its horror," Vethral said quietly. "What matters is how it ended." Zira shook her head. "More stories. More legends. I have requested full access to the classified archives, and I have been denied every time. If the threat is so real, why can no one show me the evidence?" "Because some knowledge is too dangerous to share. That is the excuse of tyrants and cowards," Zira snapped. "I did not rise to my position by accepting what I was told without question. I achieved everything I have by seeking the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be." Vethral studied the young commander carefully. He saw the fire in her eyes, the absolute certainty that she was on the right side of history. He had seen that look before in the eyes of revolutionaries and reformers across the centuries. Sometimes they changed the galaxy for the better. More often, they destroyed themselves and everyone around them. "What exactly are you proposing?" Vethral asked. Zira smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "I am proposing nothing. I am simply informing the Council that I intend to investigate the human quarantine personally. I will cross the boundary, make contact with the species inside, and determine once and for all whether the legends are true." The chamber erupted in shouts of outrage. Representatives from a dozen species rose to their feet, demanding that Zira be arrested immediately. Guards moved toward her, weapons drawn. But Zira had planned for this. Before anyone could reach her, she touched a device on her wrist and vanished in a flash of light. Personal teleportation technology, stolen from the Concord's own research facilities. Vethral closed his eyes. He had lived long enough to know that nothing good would come from this. The young commander had just set in motion events that could not be stopped. somewhere in the outer reaches of the galaxy, Zira's ship emerged from the teleportation jump. She was alone, as she had planned. Her vessel was small but fast, equipped with the best stealth technology the Velith Republic could provide. She had spent years preparing for this moment, gathering resources, building contacts, and planning every detail of her journey. The human solar system lay before her, surrounded by a ring of warning buoys that transmitted their message in every known language. Do not enter. Do not communicate. Do not engage. The warnings were ancient, their technology degraded by centuries of neglect. No one had ever bothered to update them because no one had ever been foolish enough to approach them. Zira guided her ship past the buoys with ease. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she kept her hands steady on the controls. She was making history. She was proving that the old fears were nothing but superstition. She was going to change everything. The third planet from the star grew larger in her view screen. Earth, the humans called it. A small blue world with white clouds and green continents. It looked peaceful from this distance. Beautiful, even. Zira wondered what she would find there. A primitive species struggling with basic technology? A civilization torn apart by internal conflicts? The legends spoke of human violence, of their tendency to fight among themselves. Perhaps they had already destroyed their own world, and the quarantine was protecting nothing but ruins. She would know soon enough. As her ship crossed the final threshold into the inner solar system. Every alarm on her bridge suddenly screamed to life. Targeting systems, weapons locks, sensor sweeps from a dozen different directions. Zira's blood ran cold as she realized that she had made a terrible mistake. The humans had detected her. They had detected her instantly, despite every stealth system she possessed. And now, as she watched in horror, 3 vessels appeared around her ship as if they had materialized from empty space. The ships were unlike anything Zira had ever seen. They were sleek and angular, covered in patterns of light that seemed to shift and change as she watched. They moved with perfect precision, surrounding her vessel in a formation that left no escape route. A voice came through her communication system, speaking in perfect Velith. That should have been impossible. The humans had been isolated for 3,000 years. They should not have known her language existed. Unknown vessel, the voice said calmly. You have entered restricted space. Identify yourself and state your purpose. Zira's throat was dry, but she forced herself to speak. I am Commander Zira of the Velith Republic. I come in peace, seeking to establish contact between our peoples. There was a pause. Then, stand by for escort. The 3 vessels moved closer, and Zira understood that she was no longer in control of her fate. Whatever happened next was entirely up to the humans. She had come seeking answers. Now she was beginning to fear what those answers might be. The escort vessels guided Zira's ship toward Earth with silent efficiency. She tried to scan them, to learn something about their technology or capabilities, but her sensors returned nothing useful. It was as if the ships existed in a different reality, visible to her eyes, but invisible to her instruments. As they drew closer to the planet, Zira began to understand just how wrong her assumptions had been. She had expected to find a world still struggling with the early stages of space travel. What she saw instead took her breath away. Earth was surrounded by massive orbital rings that stretched around the planet, like glowing ribbons of light. Thousands of stations floated in perfect formation, connected by streams of traffic that moved too fast for her eyes to follow. The planet itself was covered in cities that seemed to flow across the continents like living things, their structures rising and falling in patterns that suggested growth rather than construction. This was not a primitive civilization. This was something far beyond anything the Galactic Concord had ever achieved. Zira thought about the 3,000 years of quarantine. 3,000 years during which humanity had been left completely alone, with no contact with the rest of the galaxy. No trade, no war, no distraction. Just time. Time to grow. Time to build. Time to become something the rest of the galaxy could not. Imagine, her ship was guided into a docking bay on one of the orbital stations. The bay doors closed behind her, sealing her inside. When the atmosphere stabilized, Zira opened her ship's hatch and stepped outside. A group of humans was waiting for her. They looked much as the ancient records had described. 2 arms, 2 legs, varying skin tones, standing upright. But there was something in their eyes that no record had captured. A depth, a weight. The look of a species that had lived through something terrible and survived. One of the humans stepped forward. He was an older male with gray hair and deep lines on his face. He wore simple clothing, no uniform or military symbols. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, as if he had been expecting this moment for a very long time. "I am Daniel Burke," he said. "Welcome to Earth, Commander Zira. We have been waiting for someone like you." Zira tried to maintain her composure. "You know my name?" "We know a great deal about you," Burke replied. "We know about your career in the Velith military. We know about your research into the quarantine. We know about the council meeting where you announced your intentions." He smiled slightly. The warning buoys were not just warnings. They were also sensors. We have been watching the galaxy for 3,000 years. Zira felt a chill run down her spine. "You have been watching us?" "Listening, learning, waiting." Burke gestured for her to follow. "Come, there is much you need to understand, and I believe you came here looking for answers." They walked through corridors that seemed to change shape as they moved. The walls shifted and reformed, creating passages that had not existed moments before. It was technology so advanced that Zira could not even guess at the principles behind it. "You are wondering how we achieved all of this," Burke said, not looking back. "How a species isolated for 3,000 years could develop technology beyond anything the Concord possesses. That is not the important question. What is the important question? Why we were quarantined in the first place." They entered a large chamber filled with holographic displays. The images showed scenes from what Zira assumed was human history, though they were unlike anything in the Concord's archives. She saw cities burning. She saw mass graves. She saw humans in chains being led onto alien ships. "This is what the Concord does not want you to know," Burke said quietly. 12,000 years ago, humanity made first contact with an alien species. The Sithrani hegemony. Zira recognized the name. The Sithrani had been one of the founding species of the Galactic Concord. They had disappeared millennia ago, their civilization simply vanishing from history. No one knew what had happened to them. "The Sithrani saw humans as a resource," Burke continued. "We were primitive, weak, easy to control. They occupied our world for 300 years. They used us as slave labor. They experimented on us. They harvested our population for their wars. And the entire time, we watched. We learned. We remembered." The holographic display shifted. Zira saw humans fighting back, using stolen Sithrani technology. But there was something different about their tactics. Something that made her stomach turn. They were not just fighting to win. They were fighting to destroy completely. "When we finally rose up against them, we did not stop at liberation," Burke said. "We followed them back to their homeworld. We destroyed their empire completely. Every colony, every outpost, every ship, every trace of their civilization. It took 17 days. 17 days, Zira whispered. She understood now why the war's length was not a measure of its intensity. 17 days to destroy an entire galactic empire. The efficiency of that destruction was almost impossible to comprehend. The rest of the galaxy saw what we had done, Berg said. They gathered together, formed the Concord, and made their one rule: never disturb the humans. They sealed us in our own system and hoped we would forget. Did you? Berg turned to face her, and Zira saw the full weight of human history in his eyes. Humans never forget, Commander. We simply choose when to remember. He led her to another display. This one showed Earth as it was now, surrounded by defensive systems that made the Concord's greatest weapons look like toys. We have had 3,000 years to prepare, Berg said. 3,000 years to develop technology. 3,000 years to remember what happens when someone tries to enslave us. We have no interest in conquest. We have no desire to rule the galaxy. We simply want to be left alone. Then why show me all of this? Zira asked. Because you came looking for the truth, Berg replied. And now you have found it. The question is what you will do with it. Zira looked at the displays around her. She thought about the council chamber, where representatives of dozens of species debated politics and power. She thought about the wars that still raged across the galaxy, the weaker species that were absorbed and exploited by the stronger ones. She thought about the Sithrani, who had once been masters of the stars and who were now nothing but a footnote in history. What do you want me to do? She asked. Berg smiled, and there was something cold in his expression. Go back to your Concord. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that we are watching. Tell them that we remember. And tell them that if anyone ever disturbs us again, the response will be exactly the same as before. Zira understood. The quarantine was not meant to protect the galaxy from the humans. It was meant to protect the galaxy from what happened when someone made the mistake of threatening them. She had come seeking answers. Now she had them. And she was not sure she would ever sleep peacefully again. Zira spent 3 days on Earth. Daniel Burke became her guide, showing her everything he wanted her to see. And the more she saw, the more she understood why the galaxy had feared humanity for so long. On the first day, Burke took her to the surface of the planet. They traveled in a craft that moved without any visible engine, descending through clouds and emerging above a city that stretched from horizon to horizon. Buildings rose into the sky like crystal towers, connected by bridges of light and platforms that floated without any visible support. This is New Chicago, Burke explained. One of our smaller cities. Population about 50 million. Zira stared out the window. 50 million beings in a single city. The largest city in the Velith Republic held perhaps 10 million. How many humans are there in total? On Earth? About 30 billion. In the solar system as a whole? Close to 100 billion. The numbers were staggering. The entire Galactic Concord, with its thousands of member species and millions of worlds, had a combined population of perhaps 500 billion. Humanity, confined to a single solar system, had grown to a fifth of that number. We have had a long time to grow, Burke said, as if reading her thoughts. And we have been very careful about how we use our resources. Every child is wanted. Every life is valued. We do not fight among ourselves anymore. We learned that lesson a long time ago. You stopped fighting? Burke's expression darkened. We nearly destroyed ourselves before the Sithrani ever found us. Wars, pollution, hatred. We came very close to extinction more than once. But each time, we pulled back from the edge. Each time, we learned something. He paused. The occupation taught us the final lesson. When we saw what an outside enemy could do to us, we finally understood that we could not afford to be divided. We had to become one people, or we would become no people at all. On the second day, Burke took her to visit a memorial. It was a vast structure built into the side of a mountain, filled with names carved into black stone. Millions upon millions of names, covering every surface. These are the ones we lost during the occupation, Burke said quietly. 300 years of slavery, experiments, breeding programs, mass executions. We do not know exactly how many died. The Sithrani did not bother to keep careful records of their property. Zira felt sick. She had known about the occupation, had read the vague references in the Concord archives. But seeing the names, understanding the scale of the suffering, was something different entirely. How did you survive? She asked. We are very good at surviving, Burke replied. It is perhaps our greatest talent. No matter what happens to us, no matter how much we lose, we always find a way to continue. The Sithrani thought they had broken us. They thought 300 years of cruelty had made us obedient. They were wrong. He led her deeper into the memorial, to a section that was different from the rest. Here, the walls were covered not with names, but with images. Faces, human faces. Some young and some old, all with the same expression of determination in their eyes. These are the ones who started the rebellion, Burke said. Ordinary people who decided they would rather die fighting than live as slaves. They had no weapons, no technology, no chance of success. They had only their anger and their refusal to accept their fate. But they won. They won, Burke agreed. Not at first. The first uprisings were crushed brutally. Thousands died. But each failure taught us something. Each defeat made us stronger. And eventually, we found a way. On the third day, Burke showed her the weapons. They traveled to a facility on the far side of the solar system, hidden inside an asteroid belt. The interior was vast, filled with technology that Zira could not begin to understand. Ships hung in massive hangars, their hulls covered in the same shifting patterns she had seen on her escorts. Weapon systems lined the walls, their purposes unknown but their power unmistakable. This is one of our defense stations, Burke said. We have hundreds of them throughout the system. If anyone ever tries to enter our space with hostile intent, they will face a response that no fleet in the galaxy could survive. Zira looked at the weapons. She thought about the Sithrani, who had once ruled an empire spanning thousands of stars. She thought about how quickly that empire had fallen. You could conquer the entire galaxy, she said. With this technology, no one could stop you. Burke shook his head. We could, but we will not. Conquest was the path of the Sithrani. It brought them nothing but enemies, and eventually it destroyed them. We learned from their mistake. Then why build all of this? Because there is a difference between refusing to conquer and refusing to defend ourselves, Burke replied. We have no desire to rule the galaxy, but we will never allow anyone to rule us. If we are left alone, we are content to remain in our little corner of space, building our civilization and living our lives. But if anyone threatens us, if anyone tries to do what the Sithrani did, they will face the same fate. He turned to face her, and his expression was deadly serious. This is the message I want you to carry back to the Concord, Commander. We are not your enemies. We have no interest in your wars or your politics. We simply want to be left alone. But we are watching. We are always watching. And we never forget. Zira thought about everything she had seen. The cities filled with billions of humans. The memorial with its millions of names. The weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. She thought about the Sithrani, who had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy, and who were now nothing but a memory. I understand, she said quietly. Do you? Burke asked. I am not sure you do. Not yet, but you will. When you return to the Concord and try to explain what you have seen, you will begin to understand the weight of history that humanity carries. You will understand why we are the way we are. And perhaps, if you are wise, you will help the rest of the galaxy understand as well. The next morning, Zira returned to her ship. The humans had repaired and refueled it during her stay, asking nothing in return. As she prepared to leave, Burke came to see her off. "The quarantine is meaningless," he told her. "We could have left our system at any time. We could have taken the galaxy centuries ago. We chose not to because we did not want to become what the Sithrani were. But that choice depends on the galaxy leaving us alone. What if they do not?" Zira asked. Burke smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Then they will learn the same lesson the Sithrani learned, and the galaxy will have one less species to worry about." Zira took off without another word. As her ship rose through the atmosphere and into the blackness of space, she looked back at the blue planet below. It looked so peaceful from up here, so beautiful, but she knew now what lay beneath that peaceful surface. She knew what humanity was capable of, and she knew that the galaxy had been right to be afraid. The question was whether fear would be enough to keep the peace. When Zira's ship crossed back into Concord space, every sensor station in the quadrant detected it immediately. Alarms rang across a dozen worlds. Emergency messages flew between governments. For the first time in 3,000 years, someone had entered human space and returned. The Concord's response was swift. Within hours, Zira found herself surrounded by a fleet of warships from half a dozen different species. Their weapons were aimed at her ship, ready to fire at the slightest provocation. She was ordered to surrender immediately and prepare for boarding. Zira did not resist. She allowed herself to be taken into custody and transported to the Concord capital world. She was placed in a cell designed for the most dangerous criminals, surrounded by guards who watched her every movement. For 3 days she waited in silence, seeing no one and speaking to no one. On the 4th day, Ambassador Vethrol came to visit her. The old Karethi looked even more tired than when she had last seen him. His green scales had lost some of their color, and his movements were slower than before. The stress of the past weeks had aged him visibly. "You have caused more trouble than anyone in the history of the Concord," Vethrol said, settling into a chair outside her cell. "The Council cannot decide whether to execute you or award you a medal." "Why would they give me a medal?" "Because you are still alive," Vethrol replied. "In 3,000 years, only a handful of ships have crossed into human space. None of them ever came back. The humans let you go. That alone is remarkable." Zira thought about her time on Earth. She thought about Daniel Burke and his calm explanations. She thought about the memorial with its millions of names and the weapons capable of destroying fleets. "They let me go because they wanted me to deliver a message." "What message?" Zira looked at the old ambassador. She saw the fear in his eyes, hidden beneath centuries of diplomatic training. He already knew the answer. He just needed to hear it from someone who had been there. "The message is simple," Zira said. "The humans know everything. They have been watching us for 3,000 years. They know every war we have fought, every treaty we have signed, every secret we have tried to hide. They are not interested in conquest. They only want to be left alone. But if anyone ever threatens them, if anyone ever tries to do what the Sithrani did, the response will be the same." Vethrol was silent for a long moment. "The Sithrani. So the legends are true." "The legends do not do it justice," Zira said. "I saw the records, Ambassador. I saw what the Sithrani did to humanity during the occupation. 300 years of slavery, experiments, mass killings. And I saw what humanity did in response. 17 days to destroy an entire galactic empire. Every colony, every ship, every trace of their civilization. Erased completely." The old Karathi closed his eyes. "We always knew. The elders of the Concord, we knew the truth. But we hoped it would never matter again. We hoped the quarantine would hold forever." "The quarantine was always an illusion," Zira said. "The humans could have left their system at any time. They chose not to because they did not want to become conquerors. But that choice depends on us. If we leave them alone, they will leave us alone. If we threaten them, we will meet the same fate as the Sithrani. Vethral opened his eyes and looked at her with something like respect. You understand more than I expected. Most who learned what you have learned would be too terrified to think clearly. I am terrified, Zira admitted. But I am also hopeful. The humans are not monsters, Ambassador. They are survivors. They built something remarkable in their isolation. A civilization without war. A society where every life is valued. They achieved what the Concord has been trying to achieve for millennia. And you think we can learn from them? I think we have to. The galaxy is changing. The old empires are weakening. New species are rising. Wars are becoming more frequent and more destructive. If we continue on our current path, we will eventually destroy ourselves. Zira leaned forward. But the humans showed me another way. A species that chose to stop fighting. A civilization that learned from its mistakes instead of repeating them. The next day, Zira was brought before the full Concord Council. The chamber was packed with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. They had come to hear her testimony, to learn what she had discovered on the Forbidden World. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by beings who had the power to kill her with a single vote. But she felt no fear. She had seen something far more frightening than political execution. She had seen what humanity could do when threatened. I crossed into human space seeking the truth, she began. I found it. But the truth is not what any of us expected. She told them everything. The technology beyond anything the Concord possessed. The population of 100 billion. The weapons capable of destroying fleets in moments. She told them about the Sithrani occupation and the rebellion that followed. She told them about the 17 days that erased an empire from existence, and she told them about the choice humanity had made. The choice not to conquer. The choice to stay in their little corner of space and build something better. The humans are not our enemies, Zira said. They never were. The quarantine was not about protecting us from them. It was about protecting us from our own mistakes. The Concord was built on the ashes of species who thought they could dominate others. The Sithrani tried to dominate humanity and paid the ultimate price. She looked around the chamber at the faces of the representatives. Some were angry. Some were afraid. Some looked thoughtful. We have a choice to make, Zira continued. We can continue as we have always been. Building empires. Fighting wars. Treating weaker species as resources to be exploited. Or we can learn from our history as the humans learned from theirs. We can become something better. And if we choose the first option? Someone called out from the back of the chamber. Zira's voice was steady. Then we will continue to be watched. The humans are patient. They have waited 3,000 years already. They will wait 3,000 more if necessary. But eventually, someone will make a mistake. Someone will threaten them. And when that happens, the response will be swift and final. The chamber erupted in argument. Representatives shouted at each other, debating what to do, how to respond. Some demanded that humanity be destroyed before they could become a threat. Others insisted that such an attack would only prove the humans right about the galaxy. Zira watched the chaos with a strange sense of calm. She had done what she came to do. She had delivered the message. What happened next was out of her hands. But as she watched the council argue, she noticed something. A small group of representatives, younger ones from species that had been marginalized by the great powers, were looking at her with something other than fear or anger. They were looking at her with hope. Perhaps change was possible after all. 2 years passed after Zira's return from human space. 2 years of debate and argument and slow, painful change. The Concord did not collapse. It did not launch an attack on humanity. Instead, something far more remarkable happened. It began to evolve. The process was not quick or easy. Old empires resisted. Traditional powers fought to maintain their control. There were crises and setbacks and moments when it seemed like nothing would change at all. But slowly, bit by bit, the galaxy began to look at itself differently. The turning point came when the Concord voted to end the quarantine. Not because they were no longer afraid of humanity. The fear remained, deep and powerful. But they had come to understand that the quarantine was a symbol of everything wrong with the way they had been doing things. It was a wall built on fear and maintained by ignorance. Tearing it down was the first step toward becoming something better. Zira stood on the observation deck of the Concord's newest diplomatic station, watching as the first official human delegation arrived. Their ship was deliberately modest, a small vessel designed to put the other species at ease. It was a gesture of goodwill, a sign that humanity was not coming to conquer. The delegation was led by Daniel Burke. Zira had not expected to see him again, but she was not surprised. He was the one who had shown her the truth about humanity. It made sense that he would be the one to help the galaxy understand that truth as well. "You came back," Burke said, joining her at the window. "I never really left," Zira replied. "Not in my mind. Everything I saw on Earth, everything you showed me, it changed me. I could not go back to being who I was before." Burke nodded slowly. "That is how it works. Once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. The only choice is what you do with it." "I tried to change things," Zira said. "I spoke to the council. I argued with the representatives. I wrote reports and gave speeches and did everything I could think of to make them understand. And it worked." Zira laughed softly. "Some of it worked." The younger representatives listened. The smaller species listened. They were the ones who had the most to gain from change and the least to lose. The old powers took longer, but eventually even they began to see that the old way of doing things was leading nowhere good. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars. The diplomatic reception was about to begin, the first official meeting between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. It was a moment that would be remembered for thousands of years. "I have to ask you something," Zira said finally. "When you showed me everything on Earth, the weapons, the defenses, the history of what you did to the Sitharani, were you trying to frighten me?" Burke considered the question carefully. "Partially. Fear is a powerful motivator. The Concord had been doing things the same way for millennia. They were comfortable, complacent. They needed to be shaken. And the other part? The other part was hope," Burke said. "I showed you the weapons because I wanted you to understand that we could destroy the galaxy if we wanted to. But I also showed you what we chose to build instead. A civilization without war. A society that learned from its mistakes. I wanted you to see that there was another way. A better way. Why did it matter what I thought?" Burke smiled. "Because someone had to break the quarantine eventually. We knew it would happen. We had been waiting for centuries. The question was what kind of person would do it. Would it be a conqueror looking for new worlds to subjugate? A scientist seeking knowledge regardless of the consequences? A politician hoping to gain power?" He turned to face her. "Or would it be someone who genuinely wanted to know the truth? Someone brave enough to question what everyone else accepted without thought? Someone who might actually understand what they found and be able to explain it to others?" "You were waiting for me," Zira realized. "We were waiting for someone like you. We did not know who it would be or when they would come. But we knew that eventually someone would be curious enough and brave enough to cross the barrier. We prepared for that moment for centuries." The diplomatic reception began an hour later. Zira watched as representatives from dozens of species met humans for the first time. There was awkwardness at first. Fear and suspicion and the weight of 3,000 years of legends. But slowly, conversations began. Questions were asked and answered. Stories were shared. She saw a young Velith officer talking earnestly with a human scientist about the stars. She saw a Karathi diplomat listening intently as a human historian explained the true story of the Sithrani occupation. She saw representatives of species that had been fighting each other for centuries standing side by side, united by their shared curiosity about this new member of the galactic community. It was not perfect. Change never is. There would be setbacks and conflicts and moments when it seemed like the old fears would overwhelm the new hope. But watching the reception, Zira felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt like the future might be better than the past. Burke found her again, near the end of the evening. The reception was winding down, and most of the representatives had left. Only a few small groups remained, still talking, still learning. What happens now? Zira asked. Now the real work begins, Burke replied. Building trust, sharing knowledge, learning to see each other as partners instead of threats. It will take decades, maybe centuries, but we have time. Are you not afraid it will go wrong? That someone will make a mistake and ruin everything? Of course I am, Burke said. Fear is part of being alive. But fear is not a reason to avoid trying. The Sithrani feared humanity, and they tried to destroy us before we could become a threat. Their fear destroyed them. We learned from that lesson. Fear must be faced, not obeyed. Zira thought about everything that had happened since she first crossed the quarantine barrier. She thought about the moments of terror and wonder. She thought about the arguments and debates and slow, painful progress. She thought about the future that was now possible because someone had been brave enough to ask a question. The galaxy had one rule, she said quietly. Never disturb the humans. And you shook it, Burke agreed. You proved that rules built on fear cannot last forever. You showed the galaxy that change is possible. I just asked the question. Burke shook his head. You did much more than that. You listened to the answer. And then you shared what you learned. That is how change happens. Not through wars or conquests or grand declarations. Through individuals who are brave enough to seek the truth and honest enough to share it. Zira looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was finally becoming part of the galactic community. Not as conquerors. Not as threats. Just as another species with something to offer. And something to learn. It was not the ending she had expected when she first crossed the quarantine barrier. It was better. The galaxy had feared humanity for what they had been. Now, finally, everyone had the chance to see what they could become, together. And that was worth all the risks she had taken. Worth all the fear she had faced. Worth everything. Because in the end, that is what hope is for. Not to promise that everything will be perfect. Just to remind us that the future is not yet written. That change is always possible. That even the oldest fears can be overcome if someone is brave enough to try. Zira had been that someone, and she would never regret it.